Thank you. All right. So this is a special work session on the general fund budget for the city of Livingston, the Livingston City Commission, and we'll start with the roll call, please.
Chair Newts,
Here.
Vice Chair Kale,
Here.
Commissioner Freeman,
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Present.
Commissioner Lyons.
Thank you. So the way we're going to do tonight's meeting, Michael and I talked before the meeting started, is he will have a presentation and then we'll work through the budget bit by bit, and we'll pause between sections for commissioner comments and for public if they show up. So we'll do staff, public, commission like normal if we get any public that shows up. So after the presentation, we can do questions and then we'll work through one section at a time like we normally do. So it's a little bit less formal than a regular commission meeting, but we'll still have some structure so that people know how to engage. Hopefully that sounds good. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Fargus.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to go through a little bit of process stuff before I start with the presentation. So this is the first meeting on the general fund. So this is only general fund. And we'll talk a little bit in the presentation about what the difference is, which you probably already know, but I always like to review it. So it is only the first session. You can decide later on that you like another work session. At the very least, you will see this twice more at a commission meeting for approval. So that's the minimum you'll see it. If you would like more work sessions to go over anything any specific, we can schedule those. But after we do this with the general fund, we will then do it with the enterprise funds and the special funds, usually in one night. So things that you won't see tonight is anything to do with water, sewer, solid waste, streets, ambulance, and some other random special funds that are out there. But those are the big things that you won't see tonight. So don't be surprised when we don't have any answers on those. But we are already through that process and we can look at scheduling those, that work session fairly shortly too. So that being said, I am going to try and share a PowerPoint presentation, which we haven't done to this point. So hopefully it'll work. Also, I got to add the nice blue, like the flag today. So that was my favorite part. It does look kind of nice. I like it. There we go. So like I said earlier, we'll start talking about generally what does the general fund pay for. These are broken down in the same order that they show up in your packet. Each one of these is a, what's what I'm looking for, page. It's not a fund, it's a account. That's what it is. Each of these, yes, and they'll look at, and the accounts will line up and we talk about them. In general, tonight, what we're talking about in expenditures is just over 6.9 million. So when we look at these percentages, that tells you what percent of that 6.9 million goes into that function in the city. This is fairly round math. Don't try to take this down to the penny, but I think it gives you a good idea of where we're spending our money. So the city commission, which is you guys, is 0.9%. And that includes not only salaries, but anything else you put in there. The court's at 2.3%. City manager's office is at 5.8%. Finance department at 3.6%. Planning at 2.7%. The attorney's office at 2.9%. Administrative services at 7.6%. And that does include rec, the pool, and HR. Facilities is at 2.6%. Central communications is at 0.6%. Central stores, which is kind of like general office supplies and those kind of things, is 1.7%. We do pay for a portion of the sanitarians, the health department's personnel cost, and that's 0.5% of our general fund. Law enforcement is 32.7%. Fire is 17.8%. That may look a little weird, like why does the police department cost so much more than the fire department? It's because that's only half of the fire department's cost. The other half comes out of the ambulance fund. And actually probably more cost out of the ambulance fund than out of the fire fund. So that's why those two numbers don't look the same. Why are they the highest numbers in the budget? It's because it's a 24/7 coverage, right? Like we're paying personnel 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So that's why those two are the largest. So fire is 17.8%, building is 2.9%, parks equate to about 9.4%. That includes the cemetery. And then dispatch while not actually in the general fund, we pay our half of dispatch out of the general fund. So the cost, it sits in the general fund. We pay about 6.4% for dispatch. You can see in the little note at the bottom that 68% of our general fund goes to personnel and benefits. So that's the majority of the general fund goes to pay people, either straight to salary or healthcare or other items. All right, so that's where we spend it. Where does it come from? Property taxes, which is what people like to talk about the most, actually only make up 42% of our total revenue. And while that is the largest single source of revenue, it is still not even half of what we get. Licenses and permits bring in about 4.6. Intergovernment revenue, 26.4. So this is grants, the state sharing some fees with us, state entitlement funds. The state entitlement funds is probably a week-long course in and of itself of how they came about, how they work, and where they come from. And then the county's portion of dispatch, their half also comes in through that intergovernmental revenue. And then charges for services. So this is just out of the general fund, remember, so it doesn't include water or sewer or solid waste, is 1.6%. And that includes the sale of confiscated items. You'll see that on the next agenda, I believe. We have that ready for the annual auction of confiscated items. Record and storage fees, grave openings, recreation, and swimming pool and other programs down at rec. Fines and forfeitures. Everybody says that we like to hand out tickets because we get so much money. It accounts for 1.5% of our revenue. Miscellaneous is 1.9%. So that includes the rent from the state, rent for the parking lots, and some donations that we get. 6.5% of our revenue comes from the permissive health levy. The permissive health levy is one of the only taxes that the city can actually adjust, but it is earmarked only for healthcare costs. It only goes directly to the city's portion of healthcare costs for employees. And then you can see the transfers in amount is about 15.1%. We often refer to that as the administrative cost allocation. That's what we charge other funds for services that come out of the general fund. So you can think of things like the water department, when they need HR support, or they need legal support, or they need support from the city manager's office, or planning or building. Those are all costs to the general fund. And so the general fund actually charges the other funds for those services. It's not on an hour per hour basis because we don't want to spend the time to do that accounting. So we basically just figure it based off of how much they have in expenditures and assume that they take a proportionate share of resources from the general fund. So it's kind of a round number, but it works pretty well and saves a lot of administration. If you guys have questions anywhere in here, please just feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I will just keep going. This year, there actually weren't a lot of significant general fund changes. We do have the addition of the marijuana sales tax. I would note, if you didn't read the paper, that we are one of only 4 counties that applied for this. And Courtney did a great job. We actually wrote this for the county and gave it to them and had said, please pass this. So in Park County in the first quarter, there were $1.3 million in sales. Of that, the sales tax is 3%. Of that 3% sales tax, cities get 45%, and we have to share it proportionally with all other cities in the county based on population. The only other incorporated city in the county is Clyde Park. So we share it with Clyde Park based on population, which means we get about 97%. So we get 97% of the 45% of the 3%, which for the first quarter was about $17,000. By state law, 50% of that is required to go to law enforcement. So if that pans out through the quarters, which we hope it will, in fact, summer quarters may go up depending on the population of tourists that are purchasing marijuana. You're looking at 68 to 70,000, maybe a little bit more for the year. So that is a new source of revenue that didn't exist before. Again, half of that is required to go to law enforcement, and then the other half just goes to the general fund. So the general fund is constrained by several things. The first is the Montana state tax system.
Michael, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, please do.
So 50% of that revenue from the marijuana sales tax is required to go to law enforcement, is it possible for that specific revenue to go to law enforcement and then less general fund revenue? Like, can that replace general fund revenue? I'm just curious about if that has an impact on our total general fund revenue, or the relative impact.
So it will. So here's the nice part about it. Anything we spend on law enforcement is with marijuana sales tax money, is money that we didn't spend out of the general fund, other revenue sources.
That's exactly my question. Thank you.
So constraints when it comes to the tax system, again, I know there's another constitutional initiative out there to limit the growth of sales or of property tax, but it's already limited by state law. So the growth of our tax base as a city is statutorily limited to half the average rate of inflation over the last 3 years. So no matter how much the total market value of the housing in Livingston goes up, the amount of tax we can collect only goes up by half the rate of inflation, the average for the last 3 years. So people that are often, like my taxes went up 20%, it's possible their taxes went up 20%, but the city didn't get 20% more money. Either the tax that went up was the schools or the county, because those are other portions that are on their property taxes, or their property value increased disproportionately to the rest of the city, and they're just paying a larger percentage than they were before. So you can think of it as if somebody's property increased twice as much as the person next to them, even if everybody's increased, the person's property that went up by twice as much is going to pay more in property taxes than the person's whose property didn't go up as much. So there's a limit to how much we can raise our mill levies. The only exception to that is new property. So property that's annexed into the city, new builds, all those go on at the original market rate. And then the total then it goes into the total that can only go up at half the average rate of inflation. I don't know if they could have made that more complicated if they tried, but it's fairly limiting in how much it can grow. And with no sales tax and the fact that we don't have the ability to institute a resort tax, even though we have tried multiple times at the legislature to change either the population limit, which was what prevents us from getting a resort tax. Right now, it's limited to cities of 5,000. We've tried to raise that. We've tried to create a new tax that's only for gateway counties that were attached to national parks. The state legislature is just not, I guess they're disinclined to acquiesce to any new tax whatsoever. So what does that result in? So these numbers are still from 2014 to 2019. I can't imagine that they're any better now. They're probably worse. So you can see the property value in the city went up 44%, but the city's tax revenue went up 26%, while the rate of expenditures went up 31%, right? So no matter what happens, because our growth rate for our taxes are half the rate of inflation, we're losing ground every year. Every year, the money we get, even if it's more, doesn't go as far, because no matter what inflation is, we're only getting half that rate.
Mike, if I can interject for a second, I do have those current numbers.
Oh, great. What are the current numbers?
So from 2018 to 2022, property values increased 59% based on the state's market valuation, where the city tax revenue only increased 19%, and our expenses have increased 31%. And then this current year, that half rate of inflation is only 1.77%. And we're hearing numbers like 8.5% actual inflation over the last year. So that gives you an idea of how difficult it is to get property tax values and property taxes that we collect to keep up with the expenses that we're required to pay out.
So thanks, Paige. I appreciate that. So you can see this, as far as property tax goes, it's a losing game. We're just going to get further behind every year. And that's just the tax structure in Montana. And there's really been nothing we can do about it to this point. We can talk a little bit about how that plays out in other funds later, but that's where we stand. So the general fund health, those are the goals that are set for the general fund. One by commission guidance specifically was 16.67, which is an operational reserve of 2 months. And then the strategic plan laid out an operational reserve of 33.33%, which is 6 months. The reasoning behind that is we obviously don't get our tax payments at the beginning of the fiscal year. Those tax payments don't come in. Our fiscal year starts in July. The tax payments don't come in until at least November. What month did they come in last year, Paige?
We've waited as long as until January to get that first large tax payment. If we collect them in October, we don't get them until November, sometimes December.
Right. So that's why we shot for that 33.33%. Because if we don't have that much of an operational reserve when we start the budget year, it means we cash flow negative. So to make payroll, we're basically using cash that isn't out of the general fund. One of the things that's hard to understand sometimes about the budget is there's a general fund and there's other funds, and you can't spend other funds' money in the general fund, but it's actually all in one bank account. Like it's actually in like 3 or 4 bank accounts, but there's not a physical bank account for each one of the funds. And so you would, I always thought this was kind of punny, but you would float the general fund by using the extra cash that was in the water fund. Like the cash that was in the bank account would be used to make payroll. And that cash was only there because of the water fund. So the general fund would go negative, and it isn't actually spent out of those different funds, but that's where the money actually comes from. So the idea was to have an operational reserve so the general fund could stand on its own. For FY, I think that should be FY23. I think I missed I missed the year on that. So it's the FY23 projections. We should end the year at about 2.7 million in the general fund, which is about a 49% operational reserve. So we're above the requirement. That being said, the current environment, I think, is probably prudent to have a little larger reserve than just the minimum. We have yet to really know what the increase in fuel costs is going to do across the city in all the funds. There's going to be a lot of increased costs that we're estimating, but I don't know exactly how great those estimates are. So having a little bit extra in the operational reserve is not a bad thing. It also gives you some flexibility if you have projects that crop up. We could spend some money out of the operational reserve without going below our targeted level. I was gonna make another point on that. 50% is the limit on the operational reserve. So you cannot go over 50% by state law. So we're really at the maximum that we can have. I left this picture in from last year just because I love the picture, but I think it also is, I think we can talk a little bit about what we presented last year versus this year. So the city budget is moving full speed ahead, but this is kind of where it's at right now. It looks great. We're doing well. It's going super well right now, but we're running out of track on how that's going to look in future years. And I'll give you some info on why I say that. The amount spent in the general fund is going up significantly. So the demands in the general fund are a lot. You can just look back at FY19. So this would be the 18-19 calendar year, FY19. Our total expenditures were 5.2 million. Total expenditures this year are 6.9. So that's over 1.5 million more in 4 years in expenditures. The revenue on that has only gone up about $1 million a year, right? Like from 5.8 million to 6.9 million. So expenditures have gone up by $1.5 million. Revenue's only gone up by about $1 million. And that's the trend I'm talking about with our revenue just not keeping up with the cost of expenditures. Development is not slowing down. We saw a busy FY21 and FY22. We're seeing even more, I think, projected development this year with some of the subdivision requests that are coming in front of the city, as well as some of the annexations. And all those are costs to the general fund, just providing services. Recruitment. So last year I said recruitment has stagnated. It's worse right now. We just heard back from our planning candidate who turned down our job offer. We offered them $80,000 to start and $85,000 in 6 months for someone that has a house in the local area. And they said the money wasn't enough. The indications were we would have probably had to pay in the mid 90s to get the individual. If we did that across, and if we matched all the department heads' base pay to that, which would be our newest employee, it would be an extra $120,000 out of the general fund just in personnel costs to keep up with the market value. One of the cuts that you'll see, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is the building director. While we wanted a building director, we basically cut it from this year's budget because there was no way to pay for it. We've used every bit of excess capacity or creative solutions that we could come up with. So we've tried to do more with less over the last few years, but we're getting to a point we're going to do less with less. The population is increasing, and the population that is here is really starting to want a higher level of service than Livingston has provided in the past. And I think that's absolutely a community decision. And that's something we need to listen to the people about, like what does the community want for levels of service versus what they pay. But there has been a desire for, I would say, a higher level of service, whether that's in trails and parks, whether that's in ambulance service, or how well the website looks, or how often we put out information. The desired level of service is increasing, but the revenue is not increasing with that. So the budget proposal you'll see tonight, the staff, when the staff got it, we gathered all of our proposed inputs, and then the staff cut over $330 from the original proposals, $330,000. So what you see has already been cut down by over $330,000. And later, if you want, I can go into at least categories that we cut, but some of it's capital, some of it's personnel. The building director was a position we just didn't fill. If we did an exercise last year and asked all the department heads how many staff positions they thought they needed to provide the level of service people expected, and the approximate cost at that time, and this is probably, I don't know what factor I should multiply this by, maybe Lisa can jump in, but last year we would have expected to have to spend another $700,000 to staff to the level of service that people expect. And that's just in the general fund. Again, we're not talking public works yet. That's just general fund positions. So what does that mean? I didn't change these from last year's because I wanted you to be able to see what I wrote last year and then see how that has either been true or not true, or has changed over the years. A moratorium on new parks and trails, mainly because we don't have the staff to maintain it. I think the last I knew for our seasonals for parks, we budgeted for 7, and I think we have 2 applicants. So we like in spring is spring cleanup. It's hard. So while we can't do new, I'm not sure we can continue to maintain what we have at the same level. So you're probably going to see reduced maintenance. No mow, while it's great for the bees, is also good for staff because we don't have enough people to do things. You're going to see an increase in the number and types of users fees, and you did already. Those were the things that we saw as the increases in the planning costs, zoning applications, business licenses. We already increased all of those fees. Reduction in city services, not yet, but we're on that path. a need for more special districts. So this is probably one of the few ways that we can relieve pressure on the general fund is to create special districts, whether those are tree districts or parks districts. Any other kind of district you can think of that would remove the response or remove the burden on the general fund of those costs. We can get to Parks District is probably a good example. You saw that out of the percentages in the general fund, Parks is a significant expenditure. I think it was bigger than everything except fire and police. Is that right? Let me look at my own. I'll look at my own thing and make sure that's right. Yeah, so Parks is at 9.4%, and that is a larger percentage than anything except law enforcement and fire. It's even more money than we spend on dispatch. So that would be one way to relieve significant pressure on the general fund would be to create a Parks District. Without something changing, there'll be an increase in wait time for city services, whether that's simple things like information requests, whether that's subdivision review, whether that's applications for building permits, whatever it is, those wait times are going to increase if the staff level doesn't increase to meet additional demand. And then limited ability to execute new projects. This might have been the first year, and this isn't general fund specific, but Shannon and I had some serious talks about, I know we have the money, but do we have the staff capacity to do projects? And that's coming down the road. Again, none of these are doom and gloom projections. This isn't something I'm gonna say is gonna fall apart tomorrow, but this is the trajectory we're on. And we need to understand what those pressures are, ways we can relieve those pressures, and what we do moving forward. So what does that all mean? Right now, our operational reserve is healthy. It's probably the best financial thing we have going for us right now. And it does give us some ability to deficit spend through the years if there's certain things that we need to do. We can spend some money out of the reserve and still be above our targets. And I think that gives us good flexibility. We're still getting a lot done. We're still meeting a lot of the tasks in the strategic plan. We're trying to increase the quality and the amount of service to residents. I just got a super nice email this week about Sam and our cemetery department and working with the public and how that service has improved over the years. People are doing a really good job of trying to step up and make services better, even without the resources. We've automated a lot of things. We've invested in computer programs and other things that let us accomplish more without more people. But service requirements are still outstripping the available staff. It is still tough to meet what people are expecting. So there's really three paths forward. They haven't changed since last year's. To match our revenue to our expenses, we can either reduce services to reduce the expenses to match the revenue. We can encourage or subsidize growth to increase revenue to meet service levels, or we can pass one or a combination of mill levies to fund services with the current tax base. And mill levies in that sense could also include the special districts, right? That would be a special district way to fund things. I mean, technically, we could also ask for a specific government services mill levy that would just go to the general fund. I just wouldn't be super optimistic about the chances of that passing in the community. So that is, I think, the end of that presentation. So I'm gonna stop there and see if there's any questions on that before we get into specifics.
Don't be shy, commissioners. Bring your questions. Go ahead, Commissioner Lyons.
Thanks, Mr. Cardos, for that presentation. That was enlightening. So I think you mentioned the parks and trails mill levy. Are there any others? So like, you mentioned that one because it's such a large proportion of the budget. Are there others that you've thought of that you think would help put some track in front of that train that's barreling into the canyon?
So that's a great Back to the Future picture if you guys aren't big Back to the Future fans. But the parks is probably the most significant because that's where we spend the most money that we could put in a special district. There are other special districts that would be useful. I think a trees special district would be useful. Not so much because we spend a lot on trees now, although we do spend more than you would think. I think the tree board is kind of revitalized, and I think there's more that they would really like to do. And there's just not anything out of the general fund to do that right now. So if they had their own source of income, and it wouldn't even have to be that significant, I think that they would appreciate that a lot. And that would also relieve some pressure on the general fund. It's tough. The big places, obviously, that we spend out of the general fund is law enforcement and fire. You could do a mill levies on the, public safety mill levy. That would be something that you could do across it. We tried that. How many years ago was that now? 3, 4? 6? No, it wasn't 6. I wasn't here 6 years ago. We went in with the county. We tried a public safety mill levy. When it included 4 years ago, that's right. When it included the county and the sheriff's office, it failed miserably. And then we separated out just the ambulance and ran that for a separate mill levy, and it passed. So one of the things we do, so the question might be, how have we maintained as many services as we've maintained to this point? Part of it is by trying to get a little more true with how we budget things. Before, we just ran an even split between fire and ambulance. Since then, we've tried to get a little more sophisticated to make sure that all of the transfers, all the ambulance calls, I would say we do 85% ambulance calls versus fire calls. So we're trying to make sure that those get accounted against the ambulance fund, and we're not paying for them out of the general fund and fire. So that's one way that we've tried to shift some of that cost. I don't know, Paige, is there any other special districts you can think of that would significantly help the general fund? I would say that Parks and Recs is by far the biggest. I think Parks and Rec budget this year is somewhere around 330,000, which is significant.
Could you give us an idea of what a special district, like what kind of difference we're talking about in revenue if we had special districts for parks or trees?
I would say right now, probably 350 to 400,000 for just parks and trees is probably where that would run. And again, it kind of works like the marijuana sales tax. It's not that it puts money into the general fund. It just is that money doesn't have to be spent out of the general fund to support the parks or trees in that case. So you basically just shift that cost from the general fund to a special district.
I didn't mean to take the floor, Commissioner Lyons. You still have the floor. Sorry about that.
No problem. If we were to go that route of a special district, that's something that would need to be put to a vote via referendum. Is that correct?
That's correct. That has to go in front of the voters to create the special district. Once it's created, the amount spent each year is basically set by the commission, but the actual creation has to go in front of the voters.
I think that's it for me now. Thanks, Mr. Gardos.
Do other commissioners have questions yet? Or do you want to start moving through? Are you ready to start moving through the spreadsheets? Okay. Mr. Cardus, do you want to lead us through your spreadsheets? You are on mute, sir.
There we go. did I share just that or did I get everything? Okay, so this is the general fund summary. I'm going to talk through this a little bit first, and then I'll explain how Chair Newts would like to go through the actual each individual items, and we'll give you a chance to ask questions on each section, basically. This is a really nice page to show you generally where things come from. Where does the money come from? You can compare it to past years. FY 19, 20, and 21 actuals, the 22 budget, and then where we're projected to be at the end of FY 22, because that obviously doesn't close out till June. And then what our budget proposal is for FY 23. You can see for FY 22 that the revenue is actually projected to be a little higher than we expected. And expenditures are projected to be a little lower. That can still change. Spring's a busy time around here, but for right now, it's looking pretty good. But I think the interesting part is the expenditure by function, which is down here. So you can see that public safety is by far the largest. So that's fire, ambulance, and then general government. But culture and recreation runs. So this is really what we spend in parks and rec. You're over $500,000, which is quite a bit, and that's very community focused, which is good. And then the fund balance is probably the other interesting part. If you look at the ending fund balances over the years, you can see that our reserve is much better than it was in FY 19, and certainly better than it was in prior years. So where we were at 1.4 million in FY 19. We're looking to be at 2.7, almost 2.8 in FY 23. But you can see not a big change from last year. I think this year's surplus is $11,000. $11,000 can disappear pretty much in a week, depending if something unforeseen comes up. And you can see even back in FY 21, we were at 2.75. So we've ran a couple deficits in the year prior. But overall, generally, the general fund has been trending correctly as far as the fund balance goes. But again, this year, we're adding $11,000 to the fund balance, which is basically it's basically even, right? We're not really gaining or losing much. $11,000 out of the 6.9 million isn't significant. So we're budgeting everything that we're bringing in at this point. If we deficit budget in future years, we have that flexibility right now, but that's only sustainable for a while. So that is the overall picture of the general fund. Each of these, so these first couple of pages, I think it's about 3 pages, is just revenue sources. So we'll go through that first and talk about any revenue sources. And then we'll go through account by account. So you can see 401 is legislative, which just means the city commission. 402 is judicial, and we'll go through those account by account. But for now, I'll stop and see if there's any questions on the fund summary, or if you want to get into any line items on the revenue descriptions.
Chair Newts.
Yeah, you have the floor.
Mr. Carters, I just have a quick question. Looking at the general fund summary, I'm just looking like from FY 19 forward to FY 23, the budget for FY 23, the personnel and benefits that cost has increased pretty significantly. Is that due to more personnel or just raising rates for folks to attract more people?
The answer to that is yes. It's to both. I think Faith was still in here in FY 19. In that meantime, we did hire the additional planner, Matthew, in that case, where it was just Jim in the office before. So that was an additional hire. We do have an additional officer. And I think we added a whole FTE in finance page, or just half? Do you remember?
We didn't, but there is actually one of the biggest changes that we made from 2019 to 2023 is there are certain benefits that were paid out of other funds. And we thought that doesn't make sense to pay a police officer out of the general fund and then pay his retirement out of a special revenue fund. So we actually changed the way we did that accounting, and we moved all of that employee's cost into the general fund. So it used to be the only thing you saw in the general fund would have been their wages, Social Security and Medicare. Now that includes their wages, their health insurance, their and their retirement contributions. And so that is probably the most significant change that probably accounted for about $500,000, especially with there's some accounting accruals that are required for law enforcement and for fire that are pretty significant. And so that's really a lot of that change. And then of course, union negotiations, things like that, that have caused people's wages to increase.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we did that was because we wanted to make it easier. Now that I remember we did it, we wanted to make it easier for the community if they came to the budget to actually understand what we were spending in that area, right? Like before, it kind of felt like we were hiding some of the costs in other places that people wouldn't look when they came. We tried to make it really simple so that when people came to see the budget, the numbers they were looking at were really reflective of what we were spending in that area. So thanks, Paige. I forgot about that.
So we're still getting the funds then from some of those special funds to do retirement or whatever that you
We are the way that
identified.
worked in the, yeah, the way that worked in the past is we just allocated a certain portion of our general levy to those other funds to cover those benefits. And now that revenue just goes to the general fund instead of those special revenue funds.
Do you have any other questions? You still have the floor.
I think that's all I have for this general fund summary. Thank you.
Can you remind me, Mr. Curtis, I know Paige has helped since I've been a commissioner, but I think she's been a department head longer than I've been a commissioner. Can you remind me when she started? Because I know she's done a lot to make the budget more transparent and easier to understand. So it's been like this long process every year. I think there's improvements. Just trying
Absolutely. She started in 2017. We started about the same time. And we've significantly changed how we account for things and how we show things. And I'm gonna tell you that I think this is a great testament to how good of a job she's done. We're starting to get calls from other communities on how do you make your budget? Like, how do you make your budget sheet to see? And so it's actually being recognized around the state that our budget book is actually one of the easiest to read and easiest for people to understand. So she's done an amazing job with that.
Thank you for helping me remember, because I know it's hard to track all the changes, but I know there's been improvements every year. So thanks, Paige, for that, for helping us understand and making it easier to follow along. Other commissioners, do you have other questions? Otherwise, there's also these 3 pages that Mr. Carter's mentioned about revenue. Do you have questions about that? Or are you ready for him to move to the next section? Okay, let's keep going then. Mr. Cardus.
Okay, so for the first account we're going to talk about is a legislative account. So this is you as a city commission. And Paige, remind me, is the percent change from the 22 budget to the 23 budget, right? Not off the projected?
Correct.
Right, so the percent change you'll see on the side is the difference between FY22 budget and the FY23 budget. So you can see this includes commissioner salaries and wages, benefits, league dues if you are members of the league of Montana League of Cities and Towns, We put the code book updates in there as part of the commission, just because I thought it reflected well that the commission makes the changes. We have a professional services line for you, which you can see that went up by 1,100%. So you guys are doing great there. Your computer costs as a proportion are in there. So the total for the commission is about $64,000 for FY23, which you see is about 3% more than FY22. So any questions on your budget?
Yeah, can you clarify that professionals, you said it's between 22 and 23? The percentage change?
Yeah, so if you look at FY22 budget, you can see that we only had $350 budgeted. We're projected to spend a little over 4,200. So we use
Okay.
that as our projection for FY23.
I was looking in the wrong line. Thank you.
It's easy to do in these things.
Yeah, I need a ruler or something. Commissioners, do you have other questions about this page? Commissioner Lyons, go ahead.
So I'm curious about legal notices. I'm guessing that's what we pay the enterprise to notice meetings. And if I'm understanding correctly, what's the anticipation there of only needing to do it half as often in 2023?
I think, and Paige, you might want to jump in here. I think we changed where we accounted some of those to the planning department, but I'm not sure if that's it.
Yeah, legal notices we had a lot of legal notices over the last couple of years because of annexations and changes to ordinances and things like that. And now that some of that is slowing down, we anticipate that expense to go down next year.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Anybody else? Okay, let's keep going. Thank you.
So account 402 is for the city judge. The increases here, the judge, I don't think, Paige, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the judge has gotten back to us with a change in her budget yet. So I did, Chris is one of those employees that's a little strange. She works for the city court, but technically she is a city employee. So the increase in salaries there is the raise that we gave her. She's the judge's clerk. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as last year. We gave her a bump in training services, jury fees, bump in jury fees, and an increase in liability insurance, but her budget's right at 155,000. Although I anticipate she'll probably come and give you some input on that herself.
Questions from the commission? Okay, let's keep rolling.
Okay, 403 is the city manager's account. The salaries and wages in here include both myself and Faith. That's why there's overtime. I obviously don't get overtime. And that's why you see the decreases along here. Last year, we had Jim Woodhull in here as Matthew had taken over as planner, but now without a planner, we moved Jim back into, I think we actually moved him into the building fund this year, since we are not looking to hire a new building director. So that's why you see the decreases across the board. And outside entity support, if you see that at the bottom, that is what we have committed to Windrider, the animal shelter, the extension office for the economic development agent. Is there one more in there?
It's the spay neuter clinic, not the animal shelter.
I'm sorry, you're right. The spay and neuter clinic. Anything else, Paige? Did I miss anything in there?
I don't believe so. I think that was it.
Was
Okay,
there the
so
learning
that's-
center?
I don't think we've allocated any money to the warming center this year.
Okay,
They didn't ask last year, so I don't know if they secured their funding somewhere else or I'm not sure, but they have not come to us with a request in the last
Oh.
year.
when they did, it came out of here though.
Yes, when we did pay for it, it came out of here. This is one thing that Paige and I have talked about moving into the commissioner's budget as well, just because it's really what you're allocating to outside agencies. It doesn't make a difference one way or the other, but just as long as everybody knows what it is.
So I'll ask a quick question. So regarding the gym and the building department, so I know you're still looking for another planner. So if a planner is hired, does that mean that Jim and the planner stay in the same group and Jim doesn't come back here, or how does that work?
No, so we didn't actually move Jim into planning. We moved him into building, which has its own separate account. And part of the reason for that is building permits, the revenue have to be spent in the building account. And so we needed to make sure to have enough expenses in the building account that we didn't have excess revenue beyond what the state allows. So he would stay in the building account and a new planner would go into the planning account.
And what happened to the building account when Jim was in your account?
That year, we actually put a lot of Brad, our building inspector, we used his salary in there, as well as some of the costs of the startup costs of the building. We were able to charge the building department a percentage of that. And so those costs more than covered what we needed to in that account.
Thank you. Other commissioners?
Chair Newts,
Yeah, go ahead.
can I just ask public relations, what's that account?
So there's a lot of stuff in there. That's mainly where we do like coats for employees, the Christmas presents that we pass out. That's the vast majority of the cost in there. It's really employee, it would probably be employee relations would be a better accounting term, but I don't think there's a line number for that. So we put it in public relations.
Don't forget the float. The float goes in there.
And the float goes in there.
And you guys are all welcome to use that also.
Yeah, don't forget that's authorized for commissioners as well. Go try it out. They love it when we come.
The float?
Yeah, the New Wave Therapy over in Bozeman. That's the
That float.
pods floating. Yeah, not down the river. We don't pay for river trips,
I'm thinking of different kind of float.
but once
I
a
thought you
quarter.
were
you
talking
can-
about the parade.
No, we don't pay for that either. But if you want to, if you want the information on it, it's New Wave Therapy in Bozeman, and you can go get a session once a quarter. That's one of the employee benefits we have instituted.
Other commissioners, anybody have questions? Next section.
Okay, so this is account 404, which is finance. Again, nothing too exciting in here. You can see the cost for our audit went up. The cost for everything's going up. No significant raises in here. Some of the office machines we reallocated, so there's some increase in cost there. You can see the total increase is about 7%. Most of that coming out of salaries and wages, but we spend about $250,000 in finance.
So is this, is this just a computer year for the finance office?
No, oh, go ahead, Paige.
If you notice up above, so there's the finance officer and then there's accounting, and in finance officer, that $1,200 that was there in 2022 was taken to zero. And I just put all of that expense into one spot.
So it's the same overall, just in a different line.
It is a little bit more, but what that R&M computer office machines is actually our cost of IT services that the county provides.
Thanks. Other commissioners? All right, I think we should keep going.
All right, so this is an exciting one. This is the elections, which there's not a projected election for 2023, so there's nothing budgeted. So I'm going to move on unless you have questions on that. All right, so this is an interesting one. This is a planner. Again, we budgeted $90,000 for a new planner, and it wasn't enough, at least not yet. This has been a tough recruit. We were very fortunate to get Matthew the way we did. But again, we're at the levels we're at. We're getting people either looking to retire or people looking to step up their careers. And Matthew was one that's looking to step up his career, which was great for him. And I think we'll continue to be supportive of those employees if this is where they choose to grow. But it is a tough recruit right now. Just getting the applications is tough, but finding people that want to come at our salary range and housing costs is becoming a pretty tough combination. So these salaries, depending, I'm hoping to spend $90,000 in the planner, but if we don't have a planner by the 1st of July, that cost will go down proportionally. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything significant we did in the planning budget this year, so I'm happy to answer questions.
I was looking down. Is everybody good with this section, or do you have questions? Okay, let's keep going.
All right, so 407, account 407 is legal services. So this is the city attorney. This includes both Courtney and Jen, the paralegal. Again, not anything significant in this budget. I think we cut professional services some and increased supplies, which makes sense because we'll be taking over the job that we used. A lot of that's Bruce that we're not using anymore to do some prosecutions. So 1% change in there, nothing significant in the legal services department.
Commissioners, still good? Want to keep going?
I have one more quick question. I'm going to ask again, public relations and the city attorney. What's that for?
I think in this one, it's dues. It's public relations subscription / dues. I think that's some of her legal. Is that right, Courtney? Some of your legal subscriptions or organizations? Oh, I might have lost Courtney. Do you know, Paige?
I believe it is, yes.
And Courtney's nodding her head in the affirmative, I believe.
Sorry, I didn't come off mute. That is professional dues as well as continuing education.
Thank you.
The infamous CLE that we hear so much about. Any other commissioners? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, so count 409 is administrative services. So this is broken up into a few different things. So this is a little more complicated than some of the other ones that we've looked at. The first one is HR. So that's Lisa in the HR department and her expenses. The only thing that we increased significantly in her budget was travel, mainly because she hasn't been able to attend any conferences due to COVID, but we're hoping to pick that back up. So we included some more in travel this year. Then there's a Civic Center admin portion, which is the cost of the Civic Center itself. Again, repairs and maintenance are significant on the Civic Center just because of its age. So we have about $57,000 budgeted there. Of note, that doesn't include the sewer improvement project, which we included in the sewer budget. And then you have the swimming pool and the splash park. I don't know if all of you have been to the splash park, but it's at Mike Webb Park at the end of G Street. That's a great a service to the community. This is salaries and wages for the pool. Overtime, again, this is for the lifeguards. Benefits for those employees. It does have its own internet service because it has to have an antenna so that they can use the program there to log in their receipts as they go. But we'll spend about $72,000, all $73,000 on the swimming pool and the splash park combined. Of note, this does not include the materials, like the operations of the pool. This is just the personnel. There's additional costs for the pool and splash park and chemicals and repairs and those kind of things in a different part of the budget. So just wanted to point that out. And then again, this is the rest of the administrative services team. So this is the admin portion, again, salaries, benefits, rec supplies. So this is where, we buy rubber bouncy balls and crayons and all the other fun stuff they use in rec, and a bunch of stuffed animals or whatever else. It's like clowns. I love it. And again, we didn't do anything significant in this. The liability insurance, so liability insurance has gone up significantly. Again, a little more in travel and lodging because we hope to get out to some more training and events. We did up their advertising budget. While 200% seems like a lot, it's $2,000. And the overall administrative services budget is $522,000, which is about a 7% increase. A lot of that's in wages to be competitive, just to pull in lifeguards for the summer. But I'm happy to answer questions.
Do any of you have questions on this section? All right, let's keep going.
Okay, so this is the facility admin's account. This will cover some costs for centralized costs. So repair and maintenance costs, some utilities and gas. I think that's for City Hall there. Again, repair and maintenance services, that's for service as we have to call in people. Building repairs. So this is just general building maintenance as we go. The only significant item in here is a building improvement, which you can see if I can find my mouse. There's $50,000. That's a $50,000 building improvement for City Hall. I don't know, you might remember during the winter me telling you that the furnaces quit a couple of times when it was significantly cold. They're basically just old at this point. So that is a replacement of the both units on the roof of City Hall. But even with that, we're looking at a almost 17% decrease in the cost of facility maintenance. And then Paige, what's the principal and interest? Which debt is this? Do you remember?
That is an airport loan and a loan from when we remodeled dispatch in 2017.
Oh yeah, that's still dispatch. So those are still under facility maintenance. And that is not the current airport loan we were talking about. That one, do you know how many years ago that was, Paige?
I don't, but I think we have 2 or 3 years left on it.
Yeah, but it was from quite a while ago. So total facilities admin is 178,000, which is about a 16% decrease. And I will answer questions.
I'll begin. So our property changed significantly, right, over the past budget cycle. Can you explain how some of these, or talk to us about how some of these the fees or what we're expecting to pay isn't really changing, even though our square footage is changing. Because I know we gained a building, lost, a rental building. But we've maintained some other spaces for different departments.
Sure. So if you look at 2021 is the year that we acquired the new city hall. So in the 2022 budget year, the building improvements weren't quite where we were. As far as the building maintenance contracts goes, those are mostly cleaning contracts, so they aren't changing from 2021. You can see they did go down, or they were lower in years prior. And the building repair has gone up some, but even though we leased the building at B Street, it was a triple net lease, so we were responsible for the maintenance on that building. So we were able to get rid of the square foot of that building and pick up the maintenance here. And honestly, the maintenance here is easier than it was on that building just because of age. Is there any other differences that you'd like to point out, Paige?
Mike, the biggest difference is that this includes the city county building. That we are going to change the way that we're managing. We are paying a huge amount of money to the county to maintain that space that we're in. And so we are looking to change the way that that's allocated out to us. So part of it is the cost of janitorial services. And that's where you see where it says building janitorial, building repair, building maintenance contract. Those are actually all the city county complex costs. Those do not include this building that we're in.
So is that something that happens in the compact, or is that just like administrative and you can, like the executive branch just deals with that and we won't see it?
Hopefully it will be dealt with in the compact. It actually doesn't exist right now in the compact. That's one of those things that's kind of been done, I think, on inertia for a lot of years. So here's a good example. We're paying a significant portion of the salary for an on-call handyman when we do almost all of our own repairs by contract. A good example that everyone loves to use is we contacted the person that we pay a significant amount of money every year for a problem with one of the toilets, and then 2 weeks later got a bill from the plumber that they had called and hired to do the work. And so we don't think we're really getting a great value out of some of that. So we're looking to restructure the way that's done. And I would love to capture that in a new chapter so that it's formalized and there aren't any questions about it.
Great. So you and staff will bring recommendations to us based on what you're seeing here and what you're describing when we get to that part of the compact. Is that right? I lost Mr. Cardus. I wonder if his mic went out. Commissioners, can you hear me? Okay. So we just lost.
All right. For some reason, I can't hear anybody, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Mm,
You cannot hear. Can Faith hear?
I don't think Grace can hear.
One of the other, Carrie, are you talking to?
I'm talking
Alright.
to,
Hold on. For some reason, I still can't hear any of you.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I don't think you can.
You can't. I could hear him though. That
Yeah.
time. I can't hear you anymore.
Now we can't hear you either.
I bet you can hear me and I can hear you now.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can. I think it is all better now.
Nice. Okay. So So I was just saying, it sounds like you and staff will bring recommendations to us when we get to that part of the compact then about how to address those concerns, right?
We will. When we do that draft portion, you'll see that. We probably will have already gone through some of the budget stuff with the county at that point. So hopefully we've kind of worked out how that will look before we actually write the chapter.
Great. I am glad to hear that the new building is efficient. I'll just say that because it's pretty even with the swap. That's nice.
It
Okay.
is. And you saw the invite from Dale to come visit his space.
Yes.
That's a great example of how this building, the city hall building, has enabled him to better utilize his space in the city county building. They did a great job with the design of the remodel. So if you get a chance, I would recommend you go over there and check it out.
Now I hope somebody took before pictures so we have something to compare it to where Dale and the police department was before. Okay, other commissioners, do any of you have questions on this section? Okay, let's keep going.
All right, so 422 is a central communication section, which is just what it sounds. It's utilities, some of our website costs, internet service, which you can see is one of the major costs. And I believe that we had I forget what the capital project was last year, but we do not have that capital project this year, which is why you see the overall decrease in the fund. Do you remember what that project was last year, Paige?
I believe it was some wireless stuff with the internet, if I remember
think that's right.
correctly.
I think that was some of the putting the Wi-Fi into the building.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
it. So
that-
we don't have to pay for it again this year.
Yeah, that was part of the remodel of the building. I mean, that was, if I remember correctly, separate. That outlay.
I'm not hearing you, Mr. Carter, so I'm not sure if you're talking to us or,
Nope, not talking right now.
okay,
Still happy to answer questions though.
okay. Other questions? Sometimes it's hard to read all the cues via Zoom. Sometimes it's hard to read the cues not via Zoom. Commissioners, are you ready to keep tracking? Okay, let's keep going.
All right, account 423, which is central stores, you can think of as central supply. Again, this is just our basic office supplies, papers, pens, fancy things like that. There are some computer supplies, some office furniture. The biggest, again, software is a large one in there. Is that the Cassell? Or is that a different central one? Do you remember?
It is. Software services is Cassell.
Yeah, so that's our accounting software. And then computer hardware, that we are having several things replaced this year as far as computer hardware goes. I think it's an email server and possibly one of the virtual machines. So Erica usually lays that out for us on what capital improvements we need each year. And there are some purchases that we have to make in computer hardware this year.
Is anybody else curious what a virtual machine is, or just me? What's a virtual machine?
So they actually have a single server that basically makes it look like it's several computers, and that's how they run some of the security software and some other things. So you can have multiple computers on one server, but they're not actual computers, they're just virtual machines. So
Thanks for the education. Other commissioners? Okay, I think we can keep going.
okay, so this is the sanitarian. Again, this is just part of our agreement with the county. This is another one that I would like to rewrite as we do the compact, just to make it clear. This one's a little confusing, but this year we'll be contributing about 38,000. Again, that's a percentage of the health department budget.
Anybody have questions? Okay, I don't see any. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we're at a 431, which is law enforcement. The most significant thing in here, and we'll get to the line items in a minute, is probably the addition of another K-9 officer. So there's going to be some costs associated with the startup of that. They also had to do, I think, some upgrades as far as their computer goes. And then you can see the vehicle amount is significantly more than usual. That's because the ones we ordered last year didn't come in because of the delays in the supply chain. So we had to push those costs from last year into this year, which will make that look bigger, but it's actually the same amount that was budgeted from last year. And their capital outlay, the 30,000 here, was that for the remodel that's going on right now, Paige?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so that will probably be paid in FY23. If not, you'll see that shift into FY22, and then there'll be a zero budgeted for FY23. So it really just depends on when we pay that out. Some increase in wages, again, through their union contract. You can see that's by far the largest portion of their cost, 1.7 million, 400,000 up here for operations. And then we've added animal control officer to the law enforcement readout, so you can see that. There was an increase in wages in this. She has been more active than past animal control officers, so there's an additional cost and supplies that we added for next year. Professional services, that is for Stafford for when we drop off strays. And I think that is it. So total all law enforcement, including animal control, is 2.2 million. It's about 5% more than it was last year. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Do any of you have questions, commissioners?
So Noops,
Mhm. Go ahead.
I was just kind of going back to what you had said earlier when we were looking at public safety, and I think there was a comment that we've added one officer over the years. There's a very significant increase in salaries from FY 2019 to 2023. Is that mostly just wage increase, or have we increased several officers? Just curious.
There's two. We increased one patrol officer, and then the deputy chief position, I think, have been added since 2019. So that's where the most increase is. And then we did a significant market adjustment at the beginning of their last CBA, which was last year or the year before. Lisa, do you remember? It all starts to run together. I think it was. Okay. So those are the increase. Those are the main increases. So two positions, one a patrol officer, one a deputy chief, and then the new CBA.
Can you tell us that acronym, what it stands for?
Yes, the collective bargaining agreement. So the agreement with the union.
Vice Chair Keel, do you have other questions?
I don't think so at this time.
I'll kind of piggyback off of what your question. So going back to I'm just reflecting back on that first chart. And I know, or I don't know, I believe that police and fire and like emergency services are all on the same line with public safety. Is that right? I mean, and there's an additional space somewhere else that's not on this spreadsheet from what you said earlier. But can you talk a little bit to why that rate of growth seems to be different than other line items, like why these departments are growing more quickly in cost than other departments appear to be?
So it depends. Some of the costs have been shifted around, but in general, any increase you see in personnel cost is going to affect those departments the most because they have the most hours of personnel costs, right? They're all 24-hour services. So while any other department is only seeing that increase from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever, they see it the entire way around. Outside of that, I don't know, Paige, you have any other insight as to why that they grow the quickest? I think just as a percentage, that's just kind of the way it works.
I would say primarily union negotiations. The other thing with law enforcement is that animal control was moved into law enforcement in FY22. So there is an increase in that where animal control used to be kind of in its own little department. And then the other side of wages for law enforcement is their pension, and pension for emergency responders. Our contribution is much, much higher than it is for PERS employees. So that's a big portion of it.
And same for liability as well, correct?
Yeah, liability insurance is allocated to the different departments based on their wages. So the wages or the departments that have the highest wages are also going to have the highest liability insurance, which is how MMIA calculates our liability insurance, is based on our compensation to our employees.
And then in terms of like salary increases, I know the collective bargaining agreement, right, only happens every few years or every 5 years or something like that. But in those agreements, I assume that's where the increases are set.
Yes.
So while the negotiations only happen every set number of years, the increases are calculated at those times.
Right, and for law enforcement and for, I don't see fire. For law enforcement, that was 3% this year.
And then the canine thing that you mentioned, Mr. Cardus, that is not an additional, it's like a replacement, right? Like
So
somebody
it's not
retired and somebody being a dog retired and it's like a new.
Sort of. Actually, we didn't get another officer, but we did get an additional canine. So we did replace Bobby with Rhino. That was the new canine officer. But then the sheriff's dog handler resigned from the force. So they had a canine officer with no handler. So there's some training costs and some equipment costs, but we took over that canine officer. So the city will actually have 2 canine officers. And so there'll be some cost just to outfit a vehicle for the canine and the original training cost to send the officer to the canine handling school.
To be clear, so that's 2 4-legged officers now. And how many humans do we have to go with those 2 4-leggeds? Because that's like a special training, right?
It is 1 officer each. So
Okay,
2
so
total officers.
2 2-leggeds and 2 4-leggeds.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I know that. I'm just trying to make sure I'm following. Thank you. Do any of you have questions? I mean, that's a fun staffer to meet if you ever see them at public events. That's pretty fun.
And our new canine officer is probably going to be a better public event canine officer than Rhino. Rhino's a great attack dog. I'm not sure I would put him out with the school kids right now. So the new officer is going to be great in the more public affairs role.
Good to know. Good to know. All right, so commissioners still ready to keep rolling? All right. Next up, fire.
Okay, we are to 441, which is fire. You can see in general, there haven't been any significant changes to fire. We are looking at spending less in tools this year. That's just a function of the cycle of how we buy things. But we're looking to spend more in, I think this is the travel line, is that right? Or no, it's office machines. I have just as much trouble lining it up as you do. So that's just in office machines. Again, salaries, looks like it's about a 3.5% increase this year for firefighters. Honestly, looking back, those are probably screaming deals that we have in the CBA compared to inflation right now. So that's looking okay. And then their wages are almost $1 million. Again, remember that is only half, or actually probably less than half, since the other portion is contained in the ambulance fund. And then our reserve program is fairly healthy. The fire department's done a great job using the reserves, one, to cut costs, but be able to maintain services to the communities, specifically transfers. The reserves have helped significantly in that program. And it also has done a wonderful job of training and making available a pool of candidates when we're looking to replace firefighters. So that program has worked out fairly well. Not without its hiccups as far administratively, but it is certainly a capability increasing program that I think we have utilized well. So total budget for the fire program is 1.2 million, and you see that's an increase of a little, about a 1 1/3%.
Commissioners, questions? All right, looks like we should keep going. Oh, you know what? Actually, this is a good time for a quick break since we just finished fire and police. Before we move into the next section, I think we should take our 5-minute break since it's almost 7 o'clock. Sound good? Quick 5 minutes? Okay, see you in 5. looks like we have the commission here and Mr. Curtis, do you have all the staff you need to start back up?
I do. All right, excellent. So we are up to 443, which is building inspector. In this fund is Jim and Brad. That's why you see overtime. That's Brad. Again, the large increases reflect the fact that Jim was moved out of the city manager's budget and into the building budget. Outside of that, no significant increases. They had to do some computer replacements. And well, that's about it. So about $200,000 in the building. Then the large percentage increase, again, you can see is because of the addition of Jim's salary into the building fund or building account.
Any questions, commissioners? So, Mr. Curtis, do you do like computer updates and like the tech service updates, like department by department as they need them, or do you just do it across the board for city staff all at once?
Yes. So IT is fairly complicated, but most of the large upgrades are driven by the IT department. Erica decides on firewalls and email servers and switches and those kind of things. And so usually those costs are driven by building, i.e. City Hall has a switch, Public Works has a switch. There's server equipment in the city county building. And so we will pay proportionally whatever she's upgrading at the time. But then some IT equipment, whether it's computers or screens or whatever, we will just replace on an as needed basis for individuals. We did spend quite a bit at the beginning of COVID on making sure everyone had a new laptop so that worked well, and added a VPN solution so people could VPN into the servers and still have access to their network drives. But outside of that, most of the IT is either driven by Erica or replacement costs as we go forward.
So most of it's through the compact then, or as needed?
It is, yep.
Chair Newts, if I may, I was just looking at what IT provided us last year, and this is just operating costs. They were about $100,000. That's the city's portion. This year, that number is actually $133,000. Some of that is driven by wages, but some of that's also driven by when certain software renews. So some software only renews every 3 years or 5 years, and it seems that the less often it renews, the more expensive it is when it does renew. So IT costs that we're incurring from the county this year are quite a bit higher than what we had to pay last year because of those. A lot of it's because of those software renewals.
Thanks.
And Paige brings up a good point that I probably haven't emphasized. It's not just the IT cost of the equipment, but we pay a portion of Erica and Liz's and Steven's salaries in IT and GIS. So as those costs go up, as the county sets those salaries, we pay proportionally for that as well.
Thank you. Other commissioners, do any of you have questions? All right, let's keep going.
So this is a super easy one. This is where we used to account for the animal control costs. We don't anymore, but it still has some left. So, but you can see nothing in this year for animal control because it's all under law enforcement. So we are to what on here is called roaming crew, but we now call parks. That was actually one of the changes in the CBA is they wanted to be referred to as parks instead of roaming crew. So we will do so. Some of this is operating supplies for them, cemetery operating costs, which isn't significant. It's about $20,000, but we do expect increases in some of it, mainly utilities. Utilities and fuel for vehicles is going to probably be an increased cost this year. Again, we tried to estimate it, but it's going to be difficult. And then again, just like any other section, personnel costs are always a lot of it. So there's $440,000 in parks personnel costs in salaries, training, and liability insurance. So that has gone up some. The liability insurance went up significantly. And again, there's some increase in office and computer. And I don't think there was anything huge up here. We did budget some more overtime. That's a function of not being able to get as many seasonals. When we don't get seasonals, we spend more in overtime on the staff we have. And outside of that, so you can see about $440,000 in personnel costs there. And then we have parks operating. Again, these are going to be increased mainly due to fuel costs. You can see that increase here from $9,000 to $12,000 for fuel. This you can see is tree maintenance. Some of this is driven by tree grants, so it's offset by the revenue of the grants, but we are spending much more than we have in past years. And then capital outlay is less this year in parks and trails specifically. And then here's where I was talking about earlier, the cost of operating the pool and the splash park, $20,000 in chemicals, $20,000 in utilities. And these might be low this year. It depends on how things go. Repairs, we hope that it stays to 9,000, and then no capital outlay specifically for the swimming pool and the splash park. So you can see that overall, through parks and cemetery, we are spending about $650,000, which is about a 5% increase. And I'll be happy to take questions.
Other commissioners?
Chair Newts,
Go ahead.
Michael, like that reduction in the capital outlay, was that the money that we spent towards the Trails and Active Transportation Plan?
So there's different portions of capital outlay. This one that I was talking about was only for pool and splash park.
Okay.
So there's nothing there. There is $37,000 in the capital outlay for the parks operating. And I don't have those exact, Paige, do you have those exact items down there?
Not on here.
That's okay.
I believe it's a vault toilet, a water fountain in Green Acres Park, a new swing set for Sacagawea. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. So they're mainly outlays like that that are improving park infrastructure.
Great, thank you.
And that $95,000 that you see in last year's did include the $50,000 that we gave to Parks and Trails.
And that was for that active transportation plan, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there were some other items in there as well, but that was the largest.
Did you have other questions?
I
Other
did not.
commissioners? Okay, thanks. Other commissioners? I have a question. Is this, so I know you were talking earlier about staff shortages. Is this a department that is the most understaffed? Even if it's seasonal, is this the most understaffed, or is it?
I think when you include seasonals, it probably is, especially in the summer. So Roman crew also helps in the winter on streets and some other areas with snow removal and some other things like that, at which I think you can see, especially on the paths that we've been starting to remove snow on. But I would say if we don't get our seasonals, this will be by far the most understaffed. And that'll show up in things such as we try to still get the mowing done, but it won't get done as often. We aren't able to do some capacity expanding things. In years past, we've been expanding the sprinkler system so that people don't have to drag sprinklers. And we don't get to do those kind of improvements when we don't have the staff available. And then really things like trails maintenance and cleanup is what suffers when we don't have that kind of staff. But yes, I would say if you count the seasonals, the parks crew is the most understaffed.
And the overtime does not make up for the difference, right? I mean, the overtime of some staff does not make up the difference for, like, nowhere
It does.
close.
It does not. I mean, they still do work some overtime to do those things that we have to get done, but there's no way they're going to make up 7 seasonals worth of overtime.
Right, I just wanted to be clear about that. So what other department besides this one is the most understaffed for like year round? Not counting like one planning director as the planning department, but like, if that makes sense, because some of the departments have a lot of people in them.
They do. I'm sure if you talk to each department, they would probably make a case for why they're the most understaffed. But Public Works is probably the roughest where we see it. Streets would probably be another one that I would say. Solid waste is hard because there's only a few of them. So when the truck, when one of the truck drivers is out, it's hard to replace them. The wastewater treatment plant is probably the water reclamation facility is probably one that is always precarious just because there's so few people and they're so hard to replace. It's mainly in Public Works. Fire would tell you that we're a whole shift short of firefighters. I know we're short admin staff, but Public Works is probably seeing the most, and it's probably where you see the most visible results of that, whether it's potholes or long grass or untrimmed trees or whatever that happens to be. That's probably where you're going to see the biggest impact.
I know that's a tough question, but thanks for that perspective. I don't have other questions right now. Other commissioners? No? Okay, let's keep going.
So this is just kind of the summary page. There's some random stuff on here. Some PERS contributions, some claims. This is the big one, transfer to other funds. You can read that as dispatch. So 405,000 to dispatch, and we'll talk a little bit about dispatch as we go down. But you can see total expenditures, 6.9 million. And this year we have a little bit of just a little surplus of $11,000. Now, that being said, last year we were projected to run a deficit of 150,000. And due to not being able to hire people and some other savings, we actually are projected to be 20,000 surplus. Do you think that's an accurate projection, Paige? Do we have any idea where we're going to be at the end of the year? Is that about right?
I feel like it's pretty accurate. Yeah.
So we did save some money, but I wouldn't say in a healthy way. We saved some money just because we couldn't hire the people we needed, which isn't exactly the way we want to do it. But that is the end of the general fund presentation. If you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them, and then we can move on to dispatch fairly quickly.
Commissioners, anybody? Okay, I think we should keep going.
And just quick before I head on, I just note that expenditures, we're only budgeting an increase of 3.3 and 2/3%, which is well below the rate of inflation right now. I think everybody would be happy if milk and bread had only gone up 3.66%. So while the budget is increasing, it's not increasing, I'd say, disproportionately to what you would expect. In fact, we're probably keeping it down in relation to actual inflation at this point. So there you go. That's my pitch for how well we're doing. So special revenue funds, this is just dispatch, right, Paige? Yeah, okay. So again, this is dispatch. You can see the total cost is 890,000. So we have half of that cost for us. It's all pretty much public safety. So I would just go straight to their revenue. So they do, most of the revenue is split between the city and the county, but there are some money in from, I believe, the 911 fund. Do they have any other? No, the 911 fund doesn't. They pay for some of the equipment, right?
Yeah, they do. The 911 fund doesn't flow through the city, that flows through the county. So there are
That's
some
correct.
of the expenses for dispatch that we don't see and don't record. And also you can ignore that year-to-date column. I don't normally show that. That was as of December of 2021.
So that is the revenue projections, which is basically just split between us and the county. And then for costs, we don't have percentages on this one. But again, almost all the cost is in wages, and for a 24/7 operation, that's what you would expect. Operating costs, they're only at about 90,000. And then they also pay an administrative cost allocation for us to manage them. So that 75,000 actually goes back into the general fund that we just talked about. So their total expenditures are around 890,000, which should give them, we're looking at a $2,100 or $2,100 surplus, which, and I don't think we have the budget or the balance on there. So that is dispatch, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Any commissioners have questions? Oh, Commissioner Lyons, go ahead.
Could you describe that professional services row? What's like, now I've lost it. Oh, it's occasionally $15,000 and occasionally nothing. What is that?
I think that is related to some of the hardware and when they bring in service. Do you remember what that is exactly, Paige?
Dale might be able to speak to this better. If I remember right, it is like, yes, it's repair support for their telephone systems. And she doesn't always need it, but when she does, it's about $15,000. And so she budgets for it, whether she actually has to spend it or not. And so this year we said, that's a lot of money in the general fund as well, for something you may or may not have to spend. So
we're hoping she won't have to spend it.
well, as of now, she's not spending it this year. So if something happens next year and she does actually have to spend it next year, we'll have the reserves available to be able to cover that expense.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And that's one of those places where I was talking about the reserve allows us some flexibility in budgeting things. This would be one of those places. We don't necessarily have to budget it, because if we do need to spend it, we know that the reserve is more than healthy enough to cover it.
Is dispatch a union shop? Is that how wages are determined for them?
Yeah, the dispatchers are part of the police union, along with the teachers and police.
Does anybody want to comment on how it was a good year in 2020 with only a $2 professional services fee? So that's a remarkably small number. I'm sure it was part of something else that just got teased out. But anything else on this section, Commission?
Yeah, I'll just add 2 cents. I wish we could pay them more. Their services are great. Peggy does a great job with what she makes do with. So yeah, money well spent, well budgeted, and also looking back at professional services back in 2019, I think I was still on the communications board at that time, but yeah, we spent 19,000 at that point. And so that's where that 15,000 keeps coming up every 2 years in the budget. So she doesn't get nicked for that. So just a point of reference. Thank you, I yield.
Anybody else? All right, let's keep going.
Okay, so that is the end of the budget presentation. So when you're asked to approve the budget, that is what you'll be approving. The rest of the information is just kind of reference, and it feeds into the budget, and it gives you kind of a longer look at least capital. So here's a good example of that. This is when we talked earlier about the 50,000 that was in the budget for the rooftop heating and cooling units. This just explains why that's in there. So I did get a couple complaints from both the state and my staff that we should keep the temperature above 50 degrees. I thought they were just whining, but so that is why we have budgeted that into this. And this kind of example of the sheet. So It gives you the project name, what the department is, what the description is, the justification for needing it, where the money will go and what year. So if this were a multi-year project, then you would see the money flow out over the different years, where it comes from, what it is, and then the fact that this is probably a high priority. So that is a pretty straightforward one. This again is the police department remodel, which we've already talked about. And again, I encourage you to go check it out. And Dale did a nice job here of tying it back to the strategic plan. So you can see that this is one of the actions in the strategic plan is to try and align our physical space with our organizational structure. And this remodel helps to achieve that. So, and you can see the nice breakdown here. You may have asked, hey, when we looked at the general fund, there was only 29,000 or 30,000 in there, but this is a $59,000 project. That's because he used some of the law enforcement impact fees to offset the cost because it is capacity expanding.
Can I ask you a quick question about these capital request forms?
Please do.
So is this just part of the process that you go through then with department heads when you're preparing the budget? Is the different department heads submit their requests before you begin the process with all department heads figuring out what to bring to us? Is that kind of how it works? And we're just, the first time I think we saw them was the last budget cycle.
Yep. And so, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. And then so then the department head ranks like the priority for their department, how important it is for their department. And then you, the city manager, would look at all of them with Paige or someone and figure it out, like play the Tetris, city Tetris with priorities.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. And we sit down, that's part of our offsite budget process as we go through these capital sheets. The department heads will have worked with Paige ahead of time to try and figure out, especially on these capital requests, to spread them out over time so they're not all hitting the general fund in one year. And that's why we try to schedule it out as far as possible and can look ahead instead of just that short view of 1 year just in front of our face. We're trying to look out a little further and see what other capital requirements are out there. So that's exactly how it works. And then once they get into the budget, that's when you would approve them. Like, so when you approve the budget, you don't, and then we haven't hit an example where there's a multi-year, but this is a good one. This is a vehicle storage one. So this is just to keep, I think this is Dale's again, to keep vehicles and evidence out of the weather. It's not in 2023, so it wasn't in the budget that we just looked at. We would expect to see this in next year's budget when it comes before you, but it's nice for us to look at and to make people think about spreading their capital requests out over years, so we're not loading up a year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and can you explain this code? I don't completely understand the difference between departmental priority and departmental ranking. I just want to make sure I understand what I'm looking at.
Sure. So the priorities are down here. So those are the Roman numerals. That's imperative, essential, important, or desirable. And then the ranking is critical, important, but could wait. Because a lot of times we have multiple capital requests that would all fall into one priority, then the department has to rank them, even if they're the same priority, so we determine which is the most important to get done first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, have you always done this? Like, have you always done this process and we're just seeing it as a commission? No?
We've always done it in some way. I mean, the capital improvement plan has existed for a long time, but I think Paige has really improved how we do it to make it more systematic and to make it, I think, easier for people to see what they're looking for. And I think really to make the department heads critically think about what they're asking for. I don't know, Paige, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think that's the biggest part of it. We would do an entire another document that was the capital improvement program. And And I think one of the first things I noticed when I started as finance director is we put all of this stuff in there with really no idea how we were going to pay for it, right? And so it also projected out the fund balances through that 5 years. And it's scary when you look at that. But I think this process makes department heads think about what projects they have coming down the pipeline. And then we can worry about how we're going to pay for that in a different way, other than just feeling like, oh my gosh, we have all of these competing projects with not just within our department, but within other departments. And helps other departments see what those projects are, so that they can also understand what they're competing for. So I feel like this is just a cleaner way to look at it. And it also gives some rationalization as to why they need this capital improvement, what the purpose is.
Thanks for that. I really like this addition to the budget. For me as a commissioner, I don't think about things every day like how many vehicles the city owns and how the city's constantly replacing vehicles. That's like one example of a thing that this demonstrates for me. And not just in, I mean, a lot in police, but not just the police department. There's many other vehicles, for example. So I really like this addition. I think it helps. I think it helps to think about what's coming too. So there's fewer surprises. So thank you. I like it. Other commissioners, do you have questions? I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Kardus. I just wanted to get clarity before you talk too much more about the forms.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
how long is this meeting noticed for? We're past the 2-hour mark. Do we need to extend it or is it open-ended?
It's till 8:30.
Oh, it is. It is till 8:30?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I'm just curious about that.
No, thanks for checking in.
Yeah, no, and just to add on, I remember seeing these capital request forms last year and I thought, what a great way to, show what each department needs or their wants and stuff like that and how to rank them and stuff like that. So I love to see this continue as it has. Thank you. I yield.
Other commissioners? Nobody? All right, what's left, Mr. Kardus? What's left?
All right, the next capital request form, and this is the K-9 vehicle that we already talked about, and you can see that is scheduled for this year. So that went into, when you looked at vehicles for the police department, it was 115,000. This was one of those costs. We looked at a couple different ways to try and do this. We actually looked at the impound lot to see if there was something we could use there. But in the end, having to custom make cages for a used vehicle was driving the cost up enough that it's probably easier just to get one specifically made for it. So the K-9 vehicle is one of those that went into this year's, obviously a high priority since we already have the K-9 officer and his handler. So that's 65,000 for that vehicle.
Newts, can I ask a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Carter, so $65,000 we got the dog for free, but $65,000 for the vehicle. How much was the training, the K-9 training for that handler? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head. Paige, do you know what that number was? Or Dale, either one of you?
Dale sent it to me, but I can't remember.
Offhand, I think the training for him to go to Ohio. Can you hear me? No.
We can hear you. It's a little quiet, but we can hear you.
So offhand, I think the training for the officer to go to Ohio for 4 weeks was right about $3,500. But that's this budget that we're currently in also.
Thank you.
And also just as a addition to that, the K9 vehicle is 65,000, but it replaced a different new vehicle that we would have had to get to replace a patrol car. So the extra cost, I think, is like 10 or 15,000 for the K9 portion of it. Is that close, Paige? Are you in the ballpark?
Thank you for clarification.
Commissioner Schwartz, I saw this, but I'm not sure what it meant.
No, it's just a $10,000 more
Okay,
compared to a typical vehicle, police vehicle.
okay. All right, what's next? Did you want to go through any more of these or what's next, Mr. Curtis?
I'm happy to go through as many as you'd like. So I think this is a great example of like the future looking nature of these. So basically it's a replacement plan for the police department. So what you're really looking at is the replacement of one vehicle a year every year. There will be some times when there has to be two when we replace command vehicles. But this shows you that we are projecting out through the year that our plan is to replace a vehicle every year. That's about how often they go out as far as mileage. So it's just a nice reminder that this is not buy a new vehicle and you're good, that you have to continue to plan for replacements as you go. And I'm happy to go through just specific capital improvement ones that you'd have questions on, or we can go through each one. It really just depends on how you would like to spend your time.
I don't think we need to go through each individual one. I think we'll give commissioners a minute to flip through them and see if they have any questions that stand out.
Mr. Curtis, will the animal control officer's new vehicle be the first electric vehicle to the fleet?
If they ever let us order it, yes. We've been on the wait list for, I think, 6 or 8 months now. But it really is a test program. If we get that vehicle and it works well for the animal control officer, we'll look at trying to expand it into possibly the parks department. That's something, again, where they don't have to leave the city. And I think it could be really useful for them to have the number of outlets that they have in that kind of vehicle for tools and charging batteries and a bunch of other stuff that they need to do. So it's a pilot program, and we'll have to figure out how we're going to do the chargers for it. But yes, I'm very excited to hopefully be able to order that fairly soon.
Great, thank you.
So I know folks always have a lot of questions on parks. That's always a item our community cares about. So is this, I'm looking at Sacagawea Park, the long-term plan where it's 20,000 each year. Is that like incremental improvements every year, putting more money in? I'm assuming we don't spend that kind of money every year now, but this is some long-term plan. I'm on page 39, if that's helpful.
So surprisingly, we do spend about that much every year in maintenance on specifically Sacagawea, because it's so large and has so much equipment in it.
Okay.
Because you have like Pompey's Playground, and I think we include things like the climbing boulder down by the lagoon in there, the swing sets, the soccer equipment, the some of the other
merry-go-round and things like that.
A little merry-go-round. And so as every year we try to increase something, sometimes it ends up just being expanding the irrigation system. But I think we do end up spending close to $20,000 in park improvements almost every year.
Now, are you going to keep those really giant swing sets? Because I see replace. And those are good teenager swing sets. I think it's really
I'm-
nice we actually have swings big enough for big kids in this town.
I'm not sure what the replacement is, but I will ask Shannon if they're teenager approved.
I think that that's like really nice to see big kids at our parks because not all city parks have things for big kids. And I really like that about Livingston. I just want to say, I think that's something that we do well is have all ages playgrounds, which is not every community is doing it. And I like
Like the
that.
skate
about us.
park.
Like the skate park. Exactly. I mean, it's like fun for the whole family. Our
And
parks.
my kids could do a double back with a full twist off those swing sets, for the adults. So you get some
And they're
air out
grown
of it.
kids.
You
And they're
get some
grown
air-
kids.
Yeah, you get air out of those adult sized ones.
Yeah, I don't want us to lose the special things about our park when we make improvements.
I think a good example, I'm sorry, for this year in Sacagawea is we're spending 10,500 just on the gazebos, just on one gazebo roof. And so unfortunately, 20,000 doesn't actually go that far in park maintenance. You would think it would, but it doesn't. So yes, we do spend that much and probably more most years.
That's good to know though, because it is a question that's come up repeatedly at the commission is how much are we spending on parks? So this is a nice demonstration of what it takes to maintain a park like Sacagawea Park. You'll have to keep us posted on those swings as decisions are made.
And
Commissioners,
make sure
other-
that we keep up our liability insurance on those big kid swings.
That's not as bad as a special rider we have to carry for the skate park.
is that a pun? Was that pun intended? A special rider? Okay.
I don't make these things up. I just deliver them.
And nobody's brought up the fire pole yet. That's like, it's not really a ride, but it's a fun thing that's special about Livingston.
It is, but it's not for the public.
No, it's not. Other topics, park equipment that the commission wants to discuss?
One thing I want to point out, if you don't mind, is that we are doing some improvements to Green Acres Park this year. So that just shows that, yes, we've taken that over. We are folding that into the group of parks maintenance, just like we do everything else in the city, and making sure that they are getting what they need down there as well. So we've incorporated that in. And a drinking fountain, I think, is a great addition down there. We'll look at other things as we go through the years, but that's a great resource for that entire area, both Green Acres and the Montague subdivision. It's just a really nice park. So we'll continue to keep that up as well.
What else have we done to Green Acres Park so far?
I think this is our first big improvement. I think after this one, we're looking at a bathroom as we look to do that in, but we'll probably wait until we get the sewer system installed and then
Right.
install the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Green Acres Park, and I really appreciate that Public Works has been working so hard with that part of our community and also Lisa getting the grant, to keep that moving forward, as that conversation was a big one back in the day. So thanks for flagging that. Anything else, commissioners? Nothing? All right, anything else, Mr. Cardis?
I do not have anything else for you this evening. So your next steps are just to decide if you'd like another workshop on the general fund. If not, it will come to you along with the other budgets once we do that. And we will notify you when we are ready to move forward with the enterprise funds.
Okay. Let's just do a quick run through of comments in case anybody wants to do comments before we close up tonight, since we have a little time. We can start with you, Mr. Cardus, if you have anything additional you want to say.
I do not. The only thing I would say is if you have more specific questions or if there's something we didn't cover, you can always set up a time to come in and talk to me, or Paige is probably the appropriate person to come in and talk to. She has all the information. It breaks down into each line item. But she's done a great job of putting that out there. So make sure, just review it. If you have any further questions, we're here to help. But and I think Commissioner Swartz can probably attest to this. It's much, much easier to read than it was 5 years ago.
It's true.
Let's run through commissioner comments, and if you want more time or another meeting for the general fund, you can address that in your comments. So we'll just be efficient and move through. Commissioner Lyons?
I don't have any additional questions, but I'd like to thank Paige and Michael for running through that so effectively. I feel like you both have a really great handle on what's going on in the budget, and I'm confident in your decisions, and I appreciate you answering our specific questions. And you both have done a great job tonight, so thank you. And as such, I do not feel the need for another meeting on the general fund, and I yield my time.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz?
Yes, once again, great job, Paige and company. And Michael, well presented, well spoken. It's excellent. I see no need to revisit the general fund, as Tori mentioned as well. Yeah, great. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Commissioner Friedman?
Ditto everything everybody said. And of course, Paige through the years is always very steady and fantastic addition when she came in, and does a great job, as well as the whole staff, Michael and everybody involved. And it's a pleasure to listen to it, and that everything's covered, because they don't have that in a lot of homes. And it's good to see that we're running a really large project intelligently, and we just got great staff all the way through, so I appreciate that. I yield.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kale?
Thank you. Again, to Paige and Michael, great job, and thank you for making it easy to read through and look at, especially as a new commissioner, and explaining everything to us. So I appreciate that tremendously. And then I would just like to make a comment that I know we have to reduce things, and I understand, we have in here reduction of maintenance and current parks and trails from the budget. I understand that, but I would also remind us that after our last meeting and all the outreach that we had from volunteer groups and other organizations that felt like they were really wanting to get involved and help push ahead some parks and trails projects, let's reach out to those folks. Let's get them engaged. Let's use them. I think we can still move projects forward that aren't monies coming out of our general fund. I think there's a lot of money out there that we can tap into, and a lot of resources that we can tap into. So let's not just say, we're done, we're not doing this, we're cutting the budget. But let's look at ways that we can tap into those other organizations and funds and volunteers. And I think that we can do those things for our community, and maybe it doesn't have to come out of the general fund. So just wanted to make that reminder. And I don't think that we need to have, I don't need another general fund meeting. So thank you very much, and I yield.
Thank you. And I wanted to comment on Commissioner Alliance's excellent use of modern technology with the yes check mark officially into the record via the Zoom meeting. I don't think I've seen a commissioner use that yet. I really like that, Vice Chair Kale. I think that could be the next creative solutions flex for the city, is thinking about all of those groups. And there were a lot of groups that have interest in helping move plans forward, knowing that our city capacity is strained. I think that's really on point. Paige, I know you hear this every single year, but this is so good. And the presentation is so good. And every time something's tweaked, and it's even better than it was the year before. And I'm not just saying that, I really appreciate being able to see what's right in front of us and also what's coming. So thank you to you and the city manager for putting this in front of us and making it easy and easier every single time. People mock me because I say these are good meetings, these budget meetings, but maybe they have gone to budget meetings in other cities where it's less clear. And I am always impressed that you can answer the most detailed questions. So thank you for answering our questions. I don't know how you remember all the things, but thank you for helping remember all the things. It's very helpful, because this is a big topic that the commission has to work on, and we don't see it every day like you do. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cardus, I don't have anything else. Thanks for a great meeting and helping us get through the general fund. I don't think we need another meeting either, so it sounds like it's unanimous that we are done with special meetings on the general fund, and we'll look forward to seeing this part come to us at a regular commission meeting. And next up is going to be the enterprise funds, right? So we'll do this again. Different numbers, different buckets of money, same general format. And Faith will probably send out a poll, or we'll bring it up at a regular commission meeting. Is that right?
Yes, it'll be probably a little bit, we haven't quite finished it on the staff side. So I would say in the next couple of weeks, you will see an invite, or at least to start the conversation of when you'd like to schedule it.
But we're okay time-wise on our timeline. We're still on target to get everything done by our.
We are, and I promised Paige I'd let her go on vacation, so it might take a little longer than that.
Yeah, Paige deserves a vacation. I think we all support that. We all support that city manager decision to let Paige go on vacation. I shouldn't speak for the whole commission saying that, but I'll say that that makes sense to me. Thank you so much. If there's nothing else, let's call it. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
Pretty-
moved.
Right.
I'll second.
Motion by Freeman and a second by Kale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Aye. So this special, what is it, work session of the city commission is adjourned at 7:51 PM. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Melissa. Good job.